What if everything you thought you knew about your life was a lie? Imagine waking up every day to the cold, silent walls of a house that's supposed to be your home, but doesn't feel like it. A house full of wealth, yet you're invisible, hidden away like a forgotten object. Allyson had lived her entire life in a closet, a literal closet in a mansion. The wealthy family who took her in never gave her a name, never showed her any affection. They had no use for her, except as a servant in their home. And Allyson learned to stay out of sight, her dreams crushed under the weight of silence and neglect. But one day everything changes. While cleaning the back of her cramped closet, Allyson stumbles upon an old forgotten box buried under a pile of clothes. She wasn't supposed to find it, but something pulls her in. Inside, there's more than just dust and old papers. There's a letter from a woman she never knew existed, her real mother. The letter reveals a truth so shocking that Allyson can hardly believe it. Her mother wasn't just any woman. She was the rightful heir to a massive fortune, a legacy that had been stolen from Allyson the moment she was born. The family who had taken her in, the ones who made her life miserable, had been hiding the truth all along. They had kept her away from her inheritance, treating her like an invisible servant while they lived in luxury. This was no longer about survival. This was about revenge. Allyson had one choice: remain hidden in the dark, or rise and take what was rightfully hers. What would you do in her shoes? Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking stories like this one. Allyson had never felt seen, not by the world, not by the family that had taken her in, and certainly not by herself. She spent most of her life in the back of the Morrow mansion, hidden away from the world in a closet barely big enough to fit a bed. No one ever asked about her. They didn't care. The Morrows were a wealthy family, with their grand rooms and endless parties. But Allyson was nothing more than a ghost in their eyes, an invisible servant who cleaned their floors, dusted their shelves, and did their bidding without a word of thanks. She had no real name, no birthday celebrated, and no one who cared enough to call her by anything but girl. She was a tool, nothing more. At first, Allyson had tried to stay quiet to keep her head down. She thought that if she worked hard enough, they might eventually notice her, maybe even love her. But as the years passed, she realized that wasn't going to happen. The Morrows had a different kind of love, the kind that was reserved for appearances, not for the child they'd taken in. No one knew she was there, except for the few servants who passed through the house, and even they rarely spoke to her. One afternoon, as she was cleaning the back of her small closet, dusting off forgotten corners that no one had touched in years, her hand brushed against something unusual, a box. It was old, with worn edges and a thick layer of dust that suggested it had been forgotten for decades. Her curiosity stirred. What could this be? She didn't remember seeing it before. For a moment she hesitated. The thought of opening it seemed forbidden, but something inside her urged her to look. It was as though the box was calling to her. She pulled it from the shadows and set it on the small, creaky floor. She wiped off the dust and, with a trembling hand, opened it. Inside she found more than she had ever expected: papers, old photographs, and a letter. The letter was yellowed and fragile, its ink faded but still legible. She took a deep breath as she began to read. To her shock, the letter was from a woman she had never met, the woman who had given birth to her. It explained that her mother had been part of a powerful, influential family, the Hargroves, who had once controlled vast amounts of wealth. But Allyson's mother had died under mysterious circumstances shortly after giving birth to her, and the inheritance had been hidden from the world. Allyson felt a surge of disbelief and confusion. Her mother wasn't just a random woman who had disappeared. She had been the heir to a fortune, and the family that had adopted Allyson. They had known all along. They had kept her hidden from the world, locked away in this mansion, so that they could claim the Hargrove wealth for themselves. The Morrows had lied to her. They had lied to everyone. The letter detailed the Hargrove family's legacy, how they had once been one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the country, but everything had changed when her mother was silenced. Allyson's inheritance had been sealed away, with the Morrows taking advantage of her absence to claim what was rightfully hers. It wasn't just an adoption, it was a calculated plan to ensure the wealth stayed in their hands, and Allyson was kept in the shadows, unaware of her true identity. The more Allyson read, the more it became clear. She wasn't just an orphan. She was a daughter of wealth, a rightful heir to a fortune that had been stolen from her. The Morrows had taken everything from her, not just her childhood, but her legacy. The realization hit her like a wave. Her whole life had been built on lies. The family she thought cared for her had never seen her as anything but a tool, a means to an end. She had been kept in the dark on purpose, hidden away like a dirty secret. The words on the paper ignited something inside Allyson, a fierce determination. She wasn't going to stay hidden anymore. The truth was out there, and Allyson was going to find it. For the first time in years, she felt something other than fear. It wasn't just anger, it was power. The power to change everything. She wasn't going to let the Morrows get away with this. With the letter clutched tightly in her hands, Allyson stood up and looked around the room, her heart pounding in her chest. The closet was still her prison, but now it felt different. It wasn't a place where she would be forgotten anymore. It was the starting point of a new journey. She had been invisible for too long. Now she was going to fight for what was hers. Allyson sat on the floor, the letter still clutched tightly in her hands. Her mind raced as the gravity of the words she had read sank in. Her mother wasn't just a random figure in her life. She was the key to a hidden fortune, and Allyson had been kept in the dark all these years. She wasn't just some orphan with no future. She was the rightful heir to an incredible wealth, a legacy that had been stolen from her. The more Allyson thought about it, the more the pieces began to fall into place. Everything, the Morrows' coldness, the way they treated her as invisible, had been deliberate. It wasn't just neglect. It was manipulation. They had known who she was, who she could become, and they had kept her in the shadows to control her. They hadn't adopted her out of kindness. They had adopted her to hide her away, to keep the Hargrove fortune for themselves. The letter had described how her mother, once part of the influential Hargrove family, had been groomed to inherit a massive fortune. The family had been among the wealthiest in the country, but after Allyson's mother died in mysterious circumstances, the wealth had been buried with her. The Morrows had come into the picture not out of love, but out of greed. They had been searching for a way to control the Hargrove fortune, and Allyson had been the key to that. Her blood ran cold as she thought about the name that appeared again and again in the letter, Charles Morrow. The man who had adopted her, the man who had raised her as an invisible servant, was the one who had orchestrated the entire plot. He knew exactly who Allyson was and what she was worth, but he had treated her like a piece of furniture, something to be used and discarded at his whim. Allyson felt a surge of anger. Charles Morrow had taken everything from her, the love of a mother, the future she was supposed to have. He had erased her past and replaced it with lies. But Allyson wasn't the scared girl she had been. She was someone different now, someone with a purpose. She had to know more. There were more secrets buried in this mansion, and Allyson wasn't going to stop until she unearthed them all. The Morrows thought they had won, but Allyson wasn't going to let them. She was going to take back what was rightfully hers. The mansion, which had always felt like a prison, now felt like a treasure chest waiting to be unlocked. Allyson moved quickly, her mind focused. She couldn't afford to waste time. The Morrows wouldn't let her take what belonged to her without a fight, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. As she continued to search the house, she discovered more evidence. Hidden rooms, locked drawers, old books with strange markings. Everything seemed to point back to the Hargrove family's wealth. But what struck Allyson most was the journal she found tucked away in the library. The journal was written by one of the original Hargroves, detailing the family's rise to power and their eventual fall from grace. But hidden between the pages were clues to where the Hargrove fortune had been hidden after Allyson's mother died. Her heart raced as she pieced together the story. The Morrows had been involved in covering up the truth for years, but they hadn't covered everything. There were holes in their story, gaps in their control that Allyson could exploit. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how deep the Morrows' deception went. They had manipulated everyone in their circle, friends, lawyers, even local authorities, into believing that Allyson had no claim to the Hargrove fortune. But it was all a lie, and now Allyson was going to expose it. With each new discovery, Allyson's resolve hardened. She wasn't just searching for answers anymore. She was searching for justice, and the Morrows were about to learn that you can't hide the truth forever. As Allyson continued her search through the mansion, uncovering secret rooms and hidden documents, she realized that she couldn't do this alone. The Morrows were powerful, and she was just one girl against a system built on lies. But even in the midst of the shadows, she found unexpected support. It started with Sarah, the housekeeper. Sarah had been working for the Morrows for decades, silently carrying out her duties without question. To Allyson, Sarah was just another face in the background, another person who ignored her existence. But as Allyson dug deeper into the history of the Morrows, she began to realize that Sarah might know more than anyone was letting on. One night, as Allyson sifted through old papers in the library, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart racing, only to find Sarah standing there in the doorway. Her expression was unreadable, but Allyson could sense something in the air, a shared understanding, a silent agreement. "You've been looking, haven't you?" Sarah's voice was low, almost a whisper. Allyson didn't answer immediately. She had to be careful. She had no idea where Sarah's loyalty lay. Could she trust her? Was she part of the conspiracy, or had she been unaware of the lies all along? "I have," Allyson finally said, her voice steady. "I know what they did to me, to my family." For a moment, Sarah said nothing, just looked at Allyson with a knowing gaze. Then she nodded. "I figured as much," she said quietly. "You deserve to know the truth." Sarah stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. Allyson's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment when she either gained an ally or faced another betrayal. But Sarah's next words would change everything. "Charles Morrow. He's not what he seems. He's been hiding things, controlling everything from the shadows. He never cared about you, Allyson. He just wanted to keep the fortune for himself." Allyson felt a rush of relief. Finally someone who understood. Finally someone who wasn't going to lie to her. "He's been covering up your mother's death for years. He made sure you were kept in the dark about your inheritance, your true identity. You were never supposed to know." The weight of Sarah's words sank in. Allyson had known that Charles Morrow had been hiding something, but she hadn't known just how deep the deception went. It wasn't just her future at stake, it was the future of the entire Hargrove legacy. "He had plans for you, you know," Sarah continued. "When you turned 18, he was going to marry you off to secure his position, make sure the Hargrove wealth stayed under his control. He didn't think you'd ever fight back. But now, you know the truth." Allyson's mind raced. Everything Charles had done, every cold glance and harsh word suddenly made sense. She had been nothing more than a pawn in his game, a tool for him to manipulate, to use for his own gain, but no longer. She was done being used. "I don't know what I can do, though," Allyson said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just one person." Sarah smiled faintly. "You're not alone anymore, Allyson. I've seen the way they treat you, and I can't stand by and let it happen. I'll help you expose them." Allyson's heart swelled with gratitude. Sarah wasn't just an ally. She was the key to understanding how the Morrows had been able to keep their lies intact for so long. Together, they could dig even deeper, find the evidence that would bring Charles Morrow and his corrupt family to their knees. Over the next few days, Allyson and Sarah worked quietly, gathering more evidence and uncovering secrets that had been hidden for years. Sarah knew the house like the back of her hand, and she helped Allyson navigate its many corridors and locked rooms. They found letters, contracts, and even a journal that contained damning information about Charles's dealings. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. The Morrows had been systematically lying to everyone, including the authorities, about Allyson's true heritage. They had used her for their own gain, keeping her out of the picture while they controlled her inheritance. But what struck Allyson most was how deep the conspiracy went. It wasn't just about money, it was about power. The Morrows had used Allyson as a pawn to secure their hold on everything, and now she had the power to turn the tables. With Sarah's help, Allyson now had the tools she needed to bring the Morrows to justice, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. Charles Morrow wouldn't give up his wealth and influence without a fight, and Allyson was going to make sure he lost it all. Allyson knew she couldn't afford to waste any time. The deeper she dug, the more she understood just how far the Morrows would go to protect their lies. But now, with Sarah's help, they had access to more than just documents. There were hidden corners of the mansion, forgotten rooms, and long-buried secrets that were waiting to be unearthed. It was time to take the next step. One evening, as the mansion was cloaked in darkness, Allyson and Sarah made their way down to the basement. It was a place the Morrows rarely visited, a cold, damp part of the house that held more than just old furniture and storage boxes. As they descended the narrow stairs, the air grew heavy, and the musty smell of mildew filled Allyson's nostrils. But she wasn't afraid. This was where the answers lay. Sarah led the way, her hand resting on a hidden switch at the base of the stairs. A small creak echoed through the air, and a hidden door slowly opened in front of them. Allyson's heart raced as she stepped inside. The room was small, lined with dusty shelves filled with old books, faded paintings and yellowed documents. But it wasn't the items themselves that caught her attention. It was what they might reveal. As Allyson moved closer to one of the shelves, her eyes caught sight of something tucked behind a row of leather-bound books. It was a safe, old and rusted, but unmistakable. Her breath hitched in her chest. This was it. The vault that had been hidden away. The vault that contained everything she needed. With shaking hands, Allyson knelt before the safe. She ran her fingers along the cold metal, searching for any clues, any sign of how to open it. Sarah stood silently behind her, watching the door for any sign of trouble. "It's locked," Allyson muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. Sarah didn't say a word. She simply stepped forward, moving one of the books aside. Beneath it was a key, small, rusted, and seemingly insignificant. But it was the key that would open the safe. Allyson's pulse quickened as she took the key and inserted it into the lock. The mechanism clicked and the door swung open, revealing its contents. Inside, Allyson found not just money, though there was plenty of that, but something far more valuable. Documents, legal papers, and old family records. But there was one thing that stood out among the rest. A ledger. The ledger contained detailed entries of financial transactions, investments, and property acquisitions. It was all in Charles Morrow's handwriting, and it clearly showed how he had manipulated Allyson's inheritance for his own gain. There in black and white was proof that the Morrows had been taking her money for years, using her name to acquire property, investments, and assets that should have belonged to her. "This is it," Allyson whispered, her voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and triumph. "This is all the evidence we need." The ledger, along with the other documents, was a goldmine of information that exposed Charles Morrow's lies. It showed how he had been siphoning money from Allyson's inheritance, hiding assets, and using his control over her to maintain his wealth. With these papers, Allyson could not only expose the truth about the Hargrove fortune, but also take back what was rightfully hers. But there was one more thing. Among the papers was a letter sealed with wax. The letter was dated years ago, long before Allyson had discovered the truth about her family. It was from her mother, written just before her death. The words were heartfelt, filled with love and sorrow. Her mother had known that Allyson's life would be difficult, that the Morrows would try to erase her existence, but she had left behind this letter as a final act of love, a way for Allyson to find out the truth. Allyson's hands trembled as she read the words, her eyes filling with tears. Her mother had known everything, and she had fought until the very end to ensure Allyson would one day know the truth. The letter wasn't just a confession, it was a gift, a way for Allyson to finally take control of her life. But as she finished reading, a cold realization settled over her. This discovery was just the beginning. The Morrows wouldn't give up easily. Charles Morrow would do whatever it took to keep his secrets hidden, and Allyson knew that the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. But she also knew that with this evidence, she had the power to tear down the walls of lies that had surrounded her for so long. Allyson closed the safe, her heart heavy but her resolve stronger than ever. She had what she needed, and she was going to make sure that the truth would come to light, no matter what it took. Allyson's pulse was racing. She had the evidence. She had the power. But now the time had come to face the man who had made her life a nightmare, Charles Morrow. For years, he had treated her as nothing more than a servant, hidden away in the shadows of his mansion. He had stolen her future and buried the truth about her family's legacy, all while living a life of luxury. But Allyson wasn't afraid anymore. She had spent too long hiding in the darkness. Now, it was his turn to face the light. The house was eerily quiet when Allyson walked into the grand office of Charles Morrow. The air felt thick with tension, every step she took resonating in the silence. Charles was seated at his desk, as always, his back turned to her, staring out the window. He didn't notice her entrance. "You should have known this day was coming," Allyson said, her voice steady, though her heart thundered in her chest. Charles slowly turned in his chair, his face a mixture of shock and anger. He had always seen her as nothing, someone to be controlled. But now, Allyson stood before him as a force he couldn't ignore. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low, but the fear underneath was clear. "I'm here for what's mine," Allyson said, walking toward him, her footsteps resolute. "Everything you've stolen from me." Charles chuckled nervously, though there was no humor in the sound. "You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine? What's always been mine? You're just an orphan. You have nothing." "Everything you've done," Allyson began, holding up the stack of documents, "has been a lie. You took my inheritance. You've hidden my family's fortune. But it's all here, Charles. Everything. The truth. The documents. The letters. The ledger. It's all in this house, and now I'm going to take back what you've stolen." Charles's face went pale. He stood up quickly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't know what you're doing. You think you can just expose me? Do you have any idea who I am? The people I know?" Allyson's eyes burned with determination. "I know exactly who you are, a liar, a thief, a man who used me, controlled me, and made me feel like I didn't matter. But I'm not the girl you used to control anymore." Charles stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You don't know what you're up against. I'll destroy you. I'll make sure no one believes you. You think the world is going to care about some orphan and her little inheritance? You're nothing. You don't get it, do you?" Allyson's voice was cold, her eyes unwavering. "It's not about the money, it's about the truth. And the truth is stronger than anything you can throw at me." Charles lunged forward, grabbing the stack of papers from her hands. But Allyson was ready. She stepped back quickly, her heart pounding, but her movements sharp and precise. She had been waiting for this moment her entire life. "You think these papers will stop me?" Charles sneered, trying to tear them up in front of her. But before he could, Allyson reached into her pocket and pulled out a backup copy of the documents, a safety measure she had taken just in case. The original papers, including the journal and the letter from her mother, were already in a safe place. He couldn't erase the truth now. "Nice try," Allyson said, watching as his anger boiled over. "But it's too late. The world is going to know what you did, and you're not going to stop me." Charles's face twisted in rage, his eyes wild with fury. "You think you've won. You think this is over. You're just a girl. What can you do?" Allyson didn't flinch. "I'm not just a girl anymore. I'm the heir to a fortune that should have been mine all along. You can't hide behind your lies anymore, Charles. You can't keep me in the shadows." Charles's expression faltered for a moment, and Allyson saw the fear that had always been there, hidden beneath his arrogance. She had found his weakness. He wasn't the powerful man he pretended to be. He was a coward who relied on deception and manipulation to get what he wanted. "You'll never get away with this," Charles spat. But there was a crack in his voice now, a hint of uncertainty. "I already have," Allyson said, her voice resolute. "This is just the beginning." With that, she turned and walked out of the office, the weight of the papers in her hands a reminder of how far she had come. The world was going to change. The Morrows had built their empire on lies, but Allyson was going to tear it down, piece by piece. And Charles Morrow would have to face the consequences of his actions. The next few days were a blur. Allyson didn't have time to process the confrontation with Charles Morrow. She had done what she needed to do, expose the truth. But now the real battle was just beginning. The documents were in the right hands, and her story was being spread across the media. But the fight for her future, her inheritance, was far from over. The walls of the Morrow mansion felt more suffocating than ever. Allyson no longer cared about the grand halls or the luxurious furnishings. It was just a house of lies, a gilded cage. But now, it was a symbol of everything she had fought to break free from. The media storm was swift and overwhelming. The Morrows, once pillars of the community, were now scrambling to keep their reputation intact. The evidence Allyson had gathered was irrefutable. The documents, the ledgers, the letter from her mother, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. The Morrows had stolen her inheritance. Charles Morrow's involvement in the cover-up was exposed, and soon the entire world knew the depth of his corruption. Allyson couldn't escape the constant barrage of phone calls, interviews, and questions. Her name was on every news channel, every headline, and while she had expected some level of attention, the reality was overwhelming. People were fascinated by her story. They couldn't believe that a girl who had been hidden away in the shadows could suddenly emerge and claim her birthright. She wasn't just an orphan anymore. She was a symbol of strength, resilience, and justice. But Allyson wasn't interested in the fame or the media attention. All she wanted was to take back what was hers and make sure that no one could ever hide the truth again. The Morrows had built their empire on lies, but it was crumbling now, piece by piece, and Charles Morrow, once so powerful, was now facing the consequences of his actions. His wealth was frozen, his reputation destroyed, and the life he had built on deception was slipping through his fingers. It wasn't just the press that turned against him. The people who had once supported him, friends, business partners, even local officials, began to turn away as the truth came to light. One by one, the Morrow family's allies withdrew. They had been complicit in the lies, but now, with the evidence laid bare, they had no choice but to disassociate themselves. The people who had once protected him now saw him for who he really was, a man who would go to any lengths to protect his wealth, even if it meant destroying an innocent girl's life. Charles Morrow tried to fight back. He attempted to discredit Allyson, claiming that she was simply trying to manipulate the media for personal gain. But no one believed him. His story had unraveled, and no amount of lies could put it back together. As for Allyson, she felt a sense of calm wash over her as the dust settled. She had won. She had fought for her truth, and she had reclaimed what was rightfully hers. The house, the wealth, the legacy. It all belonged to her now. But it wasn't about the money. It was about taking back her life, her power, and her identity. The fortune was just the beginning. What mattered most was that she had found her voice, and no one would ever silence her again. But Allyson knew that the real victory wasn't just in the material wealth. It was in the way she had turned her pain into power. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and forgotten. But in the end, she had proven that no one, no matter how rich or powerful, could keep the truth hidden forever. In the final days of the media frenzy, Allyson took a step back from the limelight. She knew her next move had to be different. It wasn't enough to expose the truth. She needed to build something meaningful, something lasting. The fortune she had inherited could fund any dream she had, but her real legacy would be what she did with it. She would use her power to help others, to give a voice to those who had been silenced, just as she once had been. Allyson Hargrove was no longer the orphan in the shadows. She was a force to be reckoned with, a woman who had reclaimed her past and was now shaping her future. The world had underestimated her once, but now they couldn't ignore her. Allyson's journey was one of redemption, but it was also a powerful reminder of how the truth has the ability to rise from the ashes of deception. For years, she lived in the shadows of the Morrow family, a forgotten orphan, hidden away from the world. She was treated as nothing more than a servant, controlled and manipulated. But in the end, she took back everything that was hers. The truth was her weapon, and with it, she brought down the walls of lies that had surrounded her. The story of Allyson Hargrove is a testament to the strength of the human spirit. It shows that no matter how dark the past may be, no matter how much we are made to feel small, we always have the power to change our fate. Allyson didn't just reclaim her inheritance, she reclaimed her identity. She became the person she was always meant to be, the woman who rose from the ashes and took back what was rightfully hers. But Allyson's victory wasn't just about the fortune she inherited. It was about the way she fought for herself and for the truth. In a world full of corruption, she chose to stand tall, to face the people who had wronged her, and to expose the lies that had shaped her life. Now Allyson's future is hers to build, and no one can take that from her. The Morrows thought they could keep her hidden, but they underestimated her strength. What started as a fight for survival became a fight for justice, and in the end, Allyson emerged victorious. What would you do if you found yourself in Allyson's shoes? How far would you go to reclaim what's yours? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.